Lawrence Yoon did a presentation at the NAR Board of Directors, and that was his annual economic update for residential housing. I'm going to share some of the highlights with you. You know, it's hard to do this in a straight talk, and some of you have heard this already, but I'm going to share the highlights, the data. Some of it, the whole message is one of positivity, I believe, about recovery for the housing nationally. But I'm going to jump in. This is, if you don't know who Lawrence Yoon is, I'm going to see if I can share the screen. Yeah, there you go. You can all see it, okay? Lawrence Yoon is one of the top 5 economists in the world, according to the people that understand economists. Very well respected, knows what he's doing. You know, quite frankly, it is the leader of our national housing market and is paid very close attention to by many sources. So I'm going to share Lawrence's talk with you real quick, and again, in a highlight format. Okay, so here we were. Let's flash back to the end of February, right? We were heading into a phenomenal spring marketplace, not just in Silicon Valley, but all across the nation. Savings, personal savings, in the first quarter of 2020 was up 152%. Now, whether that's indicative of the fact people were making more money or they were fearful of a future, the reality was, I mean, we haven't seen numbers like that in a long time. So people's personal confidence levels were running sky high. You're going to see when I get to the consumer confidence index of February, it was sitting at 130. I'll explain that number a little bit later in the talk. But trust me, it was a tremendous time for most people in the nation, all across the nation. Residential investment and home building. We're building more houses all across the nation. Housing starts in California were up. We were going to have a record year, not a record year because our record's huge, but we were going to finally turn the corner in California on building more supply, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Residential investment and home building. Home sales and remodeling was up 21% in the first quarter. Building materials and gardening sales were up 10.4%, March over March. It was going to be a banner year. And then COVID-19 hit. And by the end of the second quarter, clothing store sales were off 72.5%. Sporting and hobby store sales were off 23.8%. Department store sales off 24.5% over the same March over March time period. I heard a report on the airline industry this morning that I was listening to that said airline travel had dropped to 6% of capacity. Think about that. All across, I'm assuming that's a national number, but all across the nation, 6% of airline travel. Imagine the amount of people that were no longer moving around in our society anymore. So today, we have 5.5 million Americans have been applying for unemployment insurance per week over the past 7 weeks. 5.5 million Americans a week. The former record was 625,000 in 1 week during the Great Recession. So we've blown by any kinds of records. There's currently 36.5 million people that are involved with unemployment benefits during the pandemic. We have been creating some new jobs. They're jobs that are being created in places like Costco and Amazon fulfillment centers. In other words, they're very specific jobs. They're not high-paying jobs, but they are putting, to a certain degree, some people back to work. But still, there's 3 million more people applying for unemployment insurance, now resulting in 26 million people across the nation unemployed. So 20.5 million jobs were lost in April alone, right? I'm not telling you anything you don't hear on the news over and over and over again. But the makeup of those jobs, 1/3 of those jobs, a full 1/3 of the 20 million were leisure and hospitality. Now, if you know anything about California, that's a huge impact on our state. That means that 29% of the labor force of California now is out of work, 29%, largely in labor and, in leisure and hospitality. You know, the good news about all this, if there is a good news, is that Lawrence does believe that 80% of these jobs will come back once the pandemic is over. So it's not a forever loss of jobs. It's just a very deep economic change that, you know, he says 80% will come back. That still leaves 20% that may never come back. And we don't know the future, but it's highly likely that you know, in certain circumstances, your favorite restaurant or your favorite small store shop in your community just may not be able to survive. I read a report not too long ago that said that there was a small business closing permanently someplace in the nation every hour, right? So you start realizing that over the last 8 weeks, that's a lot of people that are simply have lost their dreams. But as Brian Buffini said in the presentation last week as well, everybody is in the same storm, but not everybody is in the same boat, right? And quite frankly, Silicon Valley, we're not in that same, we're in the storm, we're not in the same boat. We are very fortunate. And when I get to our housing report, how really strong Silicon Valley is and how well we're weathering this pandemic shutdown. And you know that because your clients are still out there trying to buy houses, very expensive houses. But let's talk about this, the fear factor, because I think this is an important element to understand. As an illustration, when New Orleans had the big flood several years ago, you all remember that New Orleans was wiped out largely because of a flood, and that shut the whole city down, right? So, but that flood was something that didn't create fear. This was a natural disaster that people said, hey, look, we flooded in the past, we've come back in the past, it will be out of commission for a period of months. In fact, they were 3 to 6 months before the city really got back to functioning again. Hotels opened again, restaurants opened again. Yes, it was a huge mess to clean up, but there was no fear associated with that. Drawing a parallel to 9/11 in New York City, when the towers went down and when New York City was attacked, that created a huge fear factor around not only the economic disaster that followed that, but really when would the city get back to normal, if it ever got back to normal, and you know, would it happen again? Would there be more planes attacking? Is this just a new way of terrorism in the United States? And that caused a prolonged unemployment period in New York City, right? So instead of a 3 to 6 month recovery, that was a 2 to 4 year, actually 5-year recovery for New York City to get rid of or get back to normal. That is the type of situation we're in currently across the nation. This is a fear-driven issue right now. The reality is there's a lot of unknowns about this type of disease. So we talk about a V-shaped recovery to the economy. We may have a V-shaped recovery in Silicon Valley. I don't really think it's going to be that easy, but it's going to be more like a prolonged U-shaped recovery as the rest of the nation gets over this fear factor that's now present with the unknowns of this disease and how we actually stop this pandemic, when a vaccine will come around. One of the reports that I heard that airline report this morning, they're talking about airline travel not returning to the same levels it was in 2019 for 3 more years. So think about that. Think about the changes to the behavior of travel that we've all traveled all over the nation. Well, not all of us, but several of us travel all over the nation on a regular basis. And to have this not return to normal capacity for 3 more years is just staggering to me. But again, it is the change that we're now facing, and this is why these reports are kind of important. So what are we doing? We're going through an expansion of the deficit, where they printed up $4 trillion in money to hand out through unemployment benefits, et cetera. You all heard about this. I talked on a couple days ago about an additional $3 trillion in unemployment benefits and PPP loans that are supposedly being voted on Friday in the latest round. So you can't just simply continue to hand out money that the nation needs badly all across our country without experiencing potentially some kind of inflation. So now the inflation word is being bantered about. The good news about this, if there is good news to inflation, is it's going to be delayed. It's going to be, in Lawrence's opinion, at least a 3 to 5 year delay on any kind of inflation. Why? Because of the oil wars, right? The wars between Russia and OPEC are still going on. The cost of oil is still dropping, or at least near all-time record lows right now, as these two major forces in the oil industry are fighting amongst each other, trying to drive the U.S. oil industry out of business, or in the middle of all this as well. But that's a whole nother talk and a whole nother story. But at the end of the day, what we have is what caused inflation in the 70s, for those of you that were around in the 70s, was OPEC and the high cost of oil. The cost per barrel was sky high at that point in time, causing 16, 17, 18% interest rates as they tried to get inflation under control. But I want to be very clear here. That's not this time right now. What's going to keep inflation in check, and important for all of us to know, is this oil crisis that's kind of going on between the fact of life right now is there is zero inflation, right? We're not experiencing anything, but it just means you can't really print $4, $5, $6 trillion of money in the United States without experiencing some kind of repercussions to these handouts that we're giving out right now. Let's flash forward to 2025. What's that going to look like? So he's projecting that we could see between 6% and 9% interest rates once again as they try and get the inflation back under control. So the moral of the story, again, this is all speculative, right? No one really knows the economic future of our country as we work our way through this pandemic. But the truth is that it's highly likely we'll start seeing some kind of increase in costs to virtually everything as inflation takes hold. So I want to be very clear in this whole presentation, and the presentation that Lawrence gave. Now is an excellent time to buy real estate, right? So what's a hedge against inflation? Owning something like real estate, especially talk to your favorite affiliate lenders, and you're going to find the cost of money is unbelievably low right now. It's truly, and you hear it all the time, we've gotten so used to 3.5%, 4%, 4.5% interest rates, like it's going to stay here forever. What he's basically saying is this is not going to be the case. So we may look back in 2025 saying, you guys remember when we could get money at 3%, 3.25%, 3.5%, right? This is a dialogue you need to be having with your clients right now, is as a hedge against inflation, and just point to the amount of money that's coming out to, offset this disaster that we have nationally, and say, look, it's highly likely that these interest rates can't last. So please do something for your family. Lock up some real estate today. And quite frankly, that's what's driving a lot of the need for housing today. So will we have inflation? Probably so. But as a caveat to all that, I don't want to be a doom and gloom person, but I do want to tell you, when in 2008, 2006, 7, and 8, when the Great Recession hit, right, we started handing out money again through all the various programs that the government then employed to offset the loss of housing and the collapse of the financial world we had back then. So we started printing money back then again. So flash forward 10 years. Did we have inflation over that last 10-year period, even though we were handing out bajillions of dollars, trillions of dollars again back then? And the answer is no. We've had no inflation whatsoever. So the economists are saying it's likely to come, but guess what? It didn't come last time. It may not come this time. So all I'm saying is that I still believe buying real estate today is going to be a great hedge against any potential future inflation, is what I'm trying to say. So please get your clients to understand, do something today. Now, the housing supply all across the nation was at a 20-year low. We know that we're experiencing incredibly short supply in Silicon Valley. This is not rocket science. You've heard me talk about this for years, but it actually had spread across the nation as well. They simply, there was such an appetite for buying housing everywhere that we had gotten to a 20-year low in available supply. So when the pandemic hit, quite frankly, it impacted a lot of the communities across the United States. You've heard me talk in the past about Iowa. Iowa is having a record year. Iowa, I guess, did not have shelter in place, or did not at least have the need to do what we needed to do in California with contracting our local economies and state economy, et cetera. So their housing's up their housing sales are up 16.9% year over year. So Iowa's having a tremendous year, but again, that's the whole nation was poised to have a very strong housing report, as we were. NAR did a flash survey of 90,000 realtors asking, what are your clients all across the nation? What are they thinking about this pandemic? Are they willing to come to the marketplace? Are they still willing to sell, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And they found that 55% of sellers were deciding to sit on the sidelines and wait during this pandemic, which obviously when 55% of anything decides not to come to a marketplace, that creates even more shortage, quite frankly. And we're seeing that in the numbers that we're seeing in Silicon Valley when I get down to my housing report, that there's still a lot of sellers, not as many as was maybe in late March, early April, that are still sitting on the sidelines. And how's that going to impact once the pandemic is lifted? The reality is probably not in our marketplace, but it may impact other marketplaces as some of the sellers come back to the market. Buyers, there were 44% of buyers have decided to put their home buying habits on hold. I think a lot of them have changed since this survey was done, because at least in our marketplace, they're out there in droves. But here's the confidence issue that I want to talk about, because 90% of the sellers that were on the market, keep in mind, this is all part of the survey that NAR did. 90% of the sellers that were on the market felt no pressure to reduce their prices. So please hear that clearly. We're experiencing that locally. This is not a crisis in confidence of the future value of housing like we had in 2008, 7, 8, 9, 10. In other words, as housing prices were starting to contract everywhere, and there was an implosion of values, the truth is that was a whole different world than we have today. When 90% of sellers are saying, hey, look, I don't need to discount my house to sell it, that's a pretty strong statement, right? And even a small percentage of that 90%, I think it was like another 13%, said they may be willing to go down 5%, but nothing more than that, right? In other words, very confident. And then the other side of the equation, what are buyers thinking? 62% of buyers said that they do not expect a discount in buying property right now. In other words, they don't see that this is going to lead to a huge softening of prices anywhere in the nation, that all of a sudden there's going to be a wave of foreclosures, short sales, opportunities, for lack of a better word, that they're going to pick up a bargain, right? In other words, the housing market is very resilient all across the nation. And I think that's driven by a supply and demand imbalance anyway. So loans, in fact, I read a report in the paper this morning, residential loans are ticked back up again. We hit I think we hit our low point in early April or mid-April, and it started to bounce back already. New applications on loans are picking up. I think you can, again, talk to your favorite affiliate lender. They'll tell you this is what's going on in the marketplace. There's a demand for financing again. There always was a demand from a refinance point of view, but new applications for people trying to buy houses is picking up. And then a couple last things I'm going to conclude before I jump into our presentation of the local market is people are quick to draw, in fact, I hear about it all the time on CNN, et cetera, parallels between the Great Depression and today, saying that, look, we're heading towards a depression. Unemployment is record all-time highs. You heard me talk about how fast people started applying for unemployment, et cetera. They were being laid off. This time is different. And I'm going to explain a couple things. This was a government-imposed economic shutdown. So hear that clearly. It was a government-imposed economic shutdown. There was no external factors that were forcing the loss of income like the Great Depression had. As an example, unemployment was 25% back then. You heard me say earlier, it's 20% today. And that's what causes people to start compare things. But the Dow Jones back in the 1920s lost 89% of value over a 10-year period. In other words, it's just really, the bottom fell out and it continued to fall out by a lot of the economic policies that were being invoked back in the 20s, right? That's not what's happening today. The economy back then was $103 billion. Today, the economy is $23 trillion, and it's contracted around 4%, right? So in the midst of all this economic chaos that we're in right now, yes, there's been a contraction to our economy. You've seen the stock market bounce up and down, but it's not lost 89% of value, you guys. The contraction has been relatively small, considering the huge government-forced economic shutdown we've gone through. So, the point is that it's just not the same. And then the next parallel I always get is it's just like the Great Recession. Housing values are going to drop. We're going to see a lot of REOs. I watched a video that another realtor sent me saying, look, there's going to be a wave of short sales, a wave of foreclosures, that people, all these people who have lost their jobs are going to now lose their houses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not saying there's not going to be some of that, because there's always economic hardship in the wake of this huge type of economic shutdown we've gone through. But it's not going to be the waves, in my belief or Lawrence's belief, that a lot of these people are talking about. The result, what caused the economic, and I flash back real quick to 2008, 2007, 2008, what caused that was the cavalier way people were borrowing money, right? So in 2000, by example, 26 homeowners took $26 billion of their equity out to finance their lifestyle. In other words, buy jet skis, go on vacations, do whatever they remodel houses, buy other investment properties. 26 billion in 2000. By 2024, or excuse me, by 2004, that number had grown to $139 billion. By 2005, 1 year later, it had grown to $450 billion. And by 2006, it was $620 billion. That, you guys, that is what caused our economic meltdown in the Great Recession. People using their houses as ATM machines, over leveraging themselves, spreading themselves too thin, thinking that the appreciation we were experiencing back then would just simply last forever, and money was free and money was cheap and there was no qualifications to get financing, none of which exists today. Right? So talk to your favorite lender. They all know how tough it is to get financing today. What is it? Citibank or one of those major brands came out and said, we're now only going to lend to people with 720 credit scores or greater. We want 20% down. We want 12 months of reserves. And the exact opposite of what was happening in 2006, 2007, and 2008. It's near impossible to pull equity out of your properties right now. Right? So we're in a very different economic time. So you really can't draw parallels between the Great Depression or the Great Recession, quite frankly. This is our time and it's a different time. Okay, so let's jump in real quick. I'm going to conclude with the projection of the future, and then I'll jump into our market. So Lawrence is saying we're going to have a recovery. We're going to languish for the second quarter and third quarter of this year. There's no question about it. There's no, in fact, I saw a huge, very lengthy economic report yesterday on California itself. There's no way we're pulling out of this in the second or third quarters. With luck, we're going to start to recover in the fourth quarter in California, right? Nationally, Lawrence is saying the same thing. But in 2021, it's going to return a little bit more to normal. We're going to have a projected 3% GDP growth again, and 2 million job gains, 1 to 3% appreciation in housing prices, and a growth of 13 to 18% of number of homes sold. So one of the numbers that I will share with you, because I want to try some parameters, but what I'm going to talk about next is housing sales in California. We average between roughly 400,000 to 420,000 homes sold statewide, right? And we've been doing that for almost 10 years now, right? We used to sell 650,000 homes. That's all gone by the wayside. Our new normal, for many reasons, is between 420 and 400,000. If you take the sales of April alone in California, this is just California, and you annualize that over a 12-month period. In other words, you said the number of sales happened in April happened for 12 consecutive months. We would have ended up at 277,000 homes sold this year. I mean, not 50%, but pretty darn close to 50% of our normal marketplace. But the economists are now saying that that's our bottom. We've hit our bottom in California. We're going to continue to build momentum. In fact, we're already seeing it locally in May. I think we're going to continue to build our way back out of this. Will we hit 400,000 sales this year? Probably not. But the new number is now 376,000. So we're looking to be down about maybe 10%, maybe slightly less than 10% by year end. That means that we're going to have a continual ramped up recovery in the third quarter and hopefully a very strong fourth quarter of 2020 for all of California. I think it's going to happen slightly faster in Silicon Valley. I don't know that we're going to hit last year's numbers yet. I haven't done enough research, or I don't really have enough data points to really project Silicon Valley yet. But I think what I'm trying to say here is it's optimistic. things are going to return a lot faster to normal here than anywhere else in the state. So that's your prediction, and that's your information on the national level. Let me jump into our local marketplace real quick and share with you what's happening in my CBVA report. Okay, so this is the numbers for the week, and if you've not seen my report before, I think most of you probably have. I don't go into a lot of detail, but I'm doing it on a weekly basis now. So I'm tracking numbers since the pandemic and want to share with you what's happening so I can give you confidence as you talk to your clients, as you talk to your buyers, as you explain to sellers why now they should be coming back to the marketplace in Santa Clara County, not waiting till sometime into the future. So here's our 7-day change. Right? So our inventory bumped up 47 units. 47 units is virtually nothing. We've been adding roughly 100 units a week for a couple weeks now. But bottom line is that we still added a few more, just not a lot more. But look at our pendings. Our pendings went up 109 in this last week. This is the turnaround I've talked about. When I shared with you a couple weeks ago that the turnaround had started, it really did start. It started right about the middle of, or the 3rd week of April, and has been picking up momentum ever since. It's actually started earlier than that. But the truth is that evidence of a strong recovery is already in place. And when you see I get to the bottom line of all this report, you'll have a lot of confident points to talk about with clients about which direction things are going. 30-day change, yes, our inventory has grown 16%, but our pendings are up 22%. Like I said, that happened 3 weeks ago and it started to climb ever since. This date last year, just as a flashback, yes, we had almost 2,000 houses unsold in Santa Clara County this time last year. We're 1,403 today. So let me talk about that just briefly, because one of the stats I track is people pulling their houses off the market. So the 2nd or the 3rd week of March was when it all started. There was 193 houses pulled off that week, and like 176 pulled off the week after that. Keep in mind, this is late March of this year. Right? People weren't sure what to do. You weren't allowed to show properties. You could only show vacant properties kind of at that point in time. And so a lot of people were simply going to the sidelines saying in their comments, we will return once the shelter in place is lifted. We still want to sell, etc. We'll be back, in other words. So that represented about 300 to 400 houses that were simply disappeared overnight. And our inventory went from 1,200 houses down to 800 houses almost overnight with available supply. We clearly have built that back up. We're now sitting at 1,403. So my question was how many of those were people coming back into the marketplace? And I think over 50% of those 400 have returned. There may be a couple hundred at most still sitting on the sidelines waiting to sell. So why am I sharing this? Because I do not see, and I think probably most of you that are in the marketplace will agree with me, that there's not a huge plethora of sellers still sitting on the sidelines saying, look, I'm not going to do anything until there's a vaccine or there's a shelter in place lifted, or, in other words, things return to normal. I don't see that. So in other words, I don't see a flood of inventory coming to the marketplace is going to bring us right back to 1,900 homes for sale. We've created an imbalance of supply and demand. We have a huge demand, we have a small supply, and I think that's going to continue through the balance of our year, which bodes very well for sellers and not so well for buyers trying to compete in this marketplace. That's the big picture here. So let's talk about individual areas. South County sitting in 154 properties. They dropped 15 in a single week. Look at the sales last week. In 1 week, you guys, South County had 37 sales, right? So if you've not seen this report before, I'll highlight what the green numbers mean. The 4-week average, so pre-pandemic, the first 5 weeks of our spring marketplace leading up to the middle of March, before any kind of there was any kind of COVID-19 shutdown in place, we had a very strong spring market. Not a record market, but one of the best markets we were going to ever have. So I took that 5-week period of time, I condensed it down to what I call the 4-week average, and that's at 14. So South County, every week for the first 5 weeks of spring, was selling 14 houses a week on average. They did 37 last week, you guys. That should be enough evidence alone for what you see I'm going to talk about here, about how strong our market is coming back. Santa Teresa had 6 homes last week. Evergreen, 13 homes last week. So again, we're outperforming our normal pre-pandemic marketplace, you guys. Yes, if you didn't hear what I talked about in the past, we did drop dramatically, right? So we averaged roughly 200 sales per week in the pre-pandemic spring marketplace, right? We dropped to 91 that first week of shelter in place. Then I think we crawled to 94 the second week of the shelter in place, right? This is late March, early April, right? People were confused. We didn't know which direction the market was going. There was confusion abounding. People didn't know about their jobs. This was so early in the process. There was not a lot of confidence about the future of housing values in Silicon Valley. Many of you had clients bail out of transactions. They said, uh-oh, I'm not going to buy at this point because housing prices are going to drop. I coached you back then to not let them back out because they would regret it. And this is the evidence, I believe, that is coming now home to roost, showing that they should have stayed in their transactions because this is going to fuel pricing growth real fast when you look at the demand in each of these marketplaces. Evergreen 13, Milpitas 9. Okay, there's only 20 houses for sale in Milpitas. There's been 20 houses for 4 weeks now. So there's just simply no supply, but 9 of them are now sold. Santa Clara, 14. Santa Clara and Central San Jose, as I have told you, continue to be strong. Santa Clara and Central San Jose never had a single week in the entire pandemic, ever since the beginning of March, that they underperformed their normal spring marketplace. So they were just impervious to what was happening with the shelter in place, as was Sunnyvale, by the way, when I get to Sunnyvale. 3 incredibly resilient marketplaces. Willow Glen, 23 sales last week, right? Willow Glen had been languishing, and being very honest. A lot of the more expensive communities had been languishing, by the way. Saratoga, Los Gatos, Cupertino, Mountain View, Palo Alto, some of the more, Almaden Valley too, by the way, had challenges with getting homes under contract. That's not the case anymore. 23 sales, that's the strongest week Willow Glen had since the pandemic. So in 8 consecutive weeks, they'd never come close to this. The dam burst, and all of a sudden, all these transactions were put together. Blossom Valley, 17. Blossom Valley had a very strong pandemic marketplace anyway. This is not their record. Blossom Valley a couple weeks ago had 22 sales. So, but again, that's affordable housing in our marketplace, continues to show the same thing. Almaden Valley had an off week. Almaden Valley had 3 sales last week. I can't really explain why they were the only market in Santa Clara County that underperformed, right? You know, I just can't tell you the explanation behind that. They had a better week last week, but they've not been as robust as some of the other communities, and their properties are having longer days on market. Cambrian, 13. Bellwether Market. Campbell, 9. Very healthy. Los Gatos, 10 sales last week, you guys. Los Gatos has not been performing well. Los Gatos has been below their 6 average for most of the 8 weeks. This is at best one of their only weeks that they well outperformed their marketplace. Saratoga, same story. Saratoga have been onesie twosies every week, 1 or 2 sales a week. It is now 8, right? So both those marketplaces tell me that there's a confidence level that's returned to homeowners and home buyers in Silicon Valley, that all of a sudden they're saying, you know what, this is good, my job's safe, my portfolio is safe, confidence in the stock market returning, confidence in their employers retaining their services. In other words, this is that kind of world we live in where I paraphrase by saying we're all in the same storm, we're just not all in the same boat, right? Our boat is pretty strong here in Santa Clara County. Cupertino sitting at 11 sales, right? Sunnyvale, 12 sales. Sunnyvale was one of those other bellwether communities. So Sunnyvale has been as high as 19 sales during the pandemic. So 12 is still, it's below what they've been doing, but that doesn't surprise me. Sunnyvale's been incredibly strong. Mountain View. Look at Mountain View, you guys. 12 sales last week. Mountain View had been one of those languishing marketplaces. A couple times they'd outperformed their 4-week average, but clearly they're blown way past that today. Will that continue? I don't know. I think so. And then Palo Alto. Palo Alto been struggling. Very expensive real estate. Lots of inventory. Was on the sidelines. People weren't willing to put their houses back. Not the case anymore. 8 sales last week. So what's our single family homes under contract this week? Now 41.4%, right? So it ticked up 2 percentage points, 3 percentage points from last week. And I know this is kind of minutia details, but I want, again, I'm pointing to as many different ways as I can tell you that things are going the right direction right now. And class 2 basically stayed the same. So here's the raw data that I want to make sure you understand as you share these things with your clients. So 8 weeks ago, you guys, we had like 600 houses on the market. We're now 967. It's been a steady climb in supply. So the supply is returning, okay? PUDs, same story. Not quite as many of them, which is not a bad thing from a PUD world. But again, it's still coming back. Opportunities are out there. New sales last week, you guys, 248. Remember I said earlier in the talk, what was our pre-pandemic weekly average? 200. So we're 50, almost 50 houses above that right now. Again, do I see that number growing? I see the number growing. Will we hit 300 sales a week? I don't know, maybe, I hope, right? But I'm telling you that that's the evidence of the demand. And that's been a steady climb. Remember, we started 8 weeks ago with 91 sales, then 94 sales. Then it jumped to 155, 167, 217, and now 248. It's been a complete and steady uptick in demand and putting transactions together. So please understand that it's there. Daily average sales, 35.4, right? We were down to like 11 sales on a daily average way back in the lowest level. So we've blown past that. Vacant properties on the MLS just tells me that if you have clients that only want to see vacant properties, there's 711 of them out there. You know, if you take the 1,436, you do the math, about half the properties on the market right now are vacant, right? So half are occupied. Homes we put under contract. So since, and this is the data, please share this with your buyers that are sitting on the sidelines thinking that, you know, I'm waiting for a better price to come because I'm just not sure there's going to be a better price to come as this competition continues to heat up, right? We put 1,520 homes under contract since the 3/16 date per our MLS, and those homes have either closed or still pending or closed. Out of those, 795% of them were vacant, 52%, 725 were owner occupied. So, you know, initially when I saw this kind of unfold, I was thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen to the poor sellers that are owner occupied that need to sell? Well, guess what? We figured out ways to still put them under contract, creative ways to still put things together, and a full 50% of our 1,520 pendings are owner occupieds. So out of those 1,520 properties that sold, listen to this, 2 of them were over $7 million. 7 of them were between $5 million and $7 million. So much for the luxury properties of Santa Clara County, you know, falling off the charts. 54 of them were between $3 million and $5 million. 179 between $2 million and $3 million. So I don't know what the math on that is 225, 230 houses, something to that effect, above $2 million, you guys. So that is the confidence that I'm trying to instill in you guys, that the high end of Santa Clara County is still moving forward. People are they're getting $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $4 million, $5 million loans. That's how confident they are in the value of Santa Clara County still being here, their employment still being here, their future values of their stock portfolios still being here. They wouldn't be doing that. And quite frankly, they didn't do that in 2008, 9, and 10. So that's what, more evidence, this is just not that type of marketplace. And 1,278 were sold below $2 million. And again, as I started my talk earlier, I think maybe I didn't, maybe you guys weren't online when I was talking about this. If you think these are great numbers, you should see what's happening in San Mateo County, right? $8 million, $12 million, $16 million, $22 million homes going under contract, right? So again, that confidence level is just confidence on steroids in San Mateo County, where they have more expensive real estate, being very honest, right? So we're doing quite well. San Mateo County is doing quite well. The whole peninsula is doing quite well, which tells me that our marketplace is going to have a pretty quick recovery. Will we get back to our numbers of 2019? Possibly not, but I think it's going to be a very strong market. Here's a couple individual marketplaces I'm going to highlight for you because I think these are charts that are worth looking at. Here's Sunnyvale. So look at the far right column, if you can see these things, the month of April. Clearly, immersed in the middle of the pandemic. There's no other way to talk about it other than people were buying houses in the month of April, knowing full well that these issues around the shelter in place were present, the pandemic was present, et cetera. And look, 10 days on market, average time in Sunnyvale, 105% of asking price. Was it off from March? Yes, it was off from March. But again, that was the indicativeness of how hot our spring was, that all of a sudden it did cool slightly, but guess what? If you were an owner in Sunnyvale, you did quite well. Same story in Santa Clara. Look at Santa Clara, 7 days on market, 105. I talked about how strong those marketplaces were. They simply never skipped a beat, right? Would these numbers be even greater, of course, if there was never a pandemic or never a shelter in place? Absolutely. Would these be astronomically off the charts? Probably. But again, we deal with what we're dealt. We're dealing with what we actually dealt, and that means we're still putting markets together. Look at Campbell, same story, 13 days on the market, and then Cambrian. Look at Cambrian, 105% of asking price, 7 days on the market. So look at the entire spring of Cambrian. Look at the entire spring of Campbell, Santa Clara, Sunnyvale. You guys, I just can't say it any other way. We have an incredible opportunity in Santa Clara County. Hopefully, you're taking advantage of it. I'm going to leave you with a couple last charts, and then I'll shut up. Let me show you. Let's go back to stop share, and then jump into one last thing here. This is what they call the Consumer Confidence Index. So, in 1985, they came up with this Consumer Confidence Index. It comes out of Michigan. It's done, I think, with the University of Michigan puts this together. And I want to show you. Remember, I talked about the consumer confidence being 130 in February. Right? Don't worry, these are not percentages. These are just numbers that are points of measure. Anyway, so February was 130. Today it's 86.9. Clearly, that's a lot less than February. No question, in a matter of a short couple months, we tumbled 40 percentage points, right? Or 40 points. But look at the 5-year average. The 5-year average is 94. So think back 5 years. Think back how strong our marketplace has been for the last 5 years. And that average was 94. We're a few percentage points below that as a nation right now. So all I'm saying here is that clearly it's not the 130 it was when we came into our spring, and we're optimistically looking for a tremendous economic year in the United States. The truth is we're getting very close to our normal 5-year number. And quite frankly, it's my belief by the end of the year, we're going to be back above that 94. So that's your entire report. I hope you got something from it. And with that, I'll shut up and let you guys do other things.